My name is Sky Borden, and I am the Deputy Director for the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center. Thank you for joining us tonight. The Mansfield Center was founded by an act of Congress in 1983 to honor the legacy of Senator Mike Mansfield and his wife, Maureen Hayes Mansfield. We work to bridge divides on local, national, and international levels and to support American democracy. Tonight's dialogue features the Honorable Shawn Skelly, who is performing the duties of the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Deputy Undersecretary Skelly served in active duty in the U.S. Navy for 20 years as a naval flight officer, retiring with the rank of commander. She held various roles in the Obama administration from 2013 to 2020. And in her current role, she is responsible for a broad range of issues, including force readiness, health affairs, education and training, as well as personnel requirements, including equal opportunity, morale, welfare, recreation, and quality of life. We are also honored to be joined tonight by University of Montana President Seth Bodnar, who will moderate the discussion. Before he joined the university in 2018, President Bodnar was a senior executive at General Electric. He also had a distinguished military career. After graduating first in his class from West Point, he served in the 101st Airborne Division and the U.S. Army's 1st Special Forces Group. As a member of the Army's elite Green Berets, he commanded a Special Forces detachment on multiple deployments around the world, and later served as a special assistant to the commanding general in Iraq. One audience note before we get started: we have received a number of questions in advance, but please do continue to write any additional questions you may have in the Q&A feature. Now I will turn it over to President Bodnar.
Thanks, Sky, and welcome everyone tonight. It is so wonderful to have you here virtually on a blustery, cold winter evening here in Montana. And I couldn't be more excited about tonight's event, though. And I want to thank the Mansfield Center, Director Dina Mansour, her entire team, and our DCLCP, Major General Don Loringer, who's played a key role in connecting with Secretary Skelly. A lot of people worked really hard to make this event happen, and I can't thank them enough. It is a true privilege to have somebody like Secretary Skelly with us here virtually at the University of Montana. And we are thrilled and honored to host tonight's dialogue. Those who know me and those who spend time here at the University of Montana know that I like to really describe our mission in just 2 words: inclusive prosperity. Our mission here, simply put, is to ensure that every single member of our university, our city, our state, the broader United States is able to achieve their unique full potential. And that means that our job is to serve and enable everyone, regardless of where you come from, what you look like, who your parents were, what high school you went to. Everyone is able to receive a world-class education here and reach their full potential. And a big part of that mission of inclusive prosperity is actually fostering a healthy democracy. And we live in a time where many in this country fear that our democracy is in crisis and at risk of failing. In fact, one recent survey found 2/3 of Americans expressed deep concern about the health of our democracy and the role that we play, not just in educating students here at the university, but in providing a place where we foster civil, informed, respectful dialogue across disagreement, where we're shaping not just educated individuals, but informed citizens who participate respectfully in an informed manner in the workings of American democracy. And a key part of our efforts in doing that is the Mansfield Center. And the legacy of service that Marine and Mike Mansfield embodied for all of us inspires us to this day. And tonight's speaker, you heard a little bit about her background, but this is an individual who has dedicated her entire lifetime to service. She was in the Navy. I will forgive her that. So she could have been in the Army, but there's somebody who just really has been an exemplar of what it means to serve the greater good. Someone who has dedicated themselves to improving the health of our democracy, and we're thrilled to engage her in conversation. I'm going to get out of the way. Let Secretary Skelly share some thoughts with us, and then we're going to open up to questions. So please do send your questions. This is a unique opportunity for our community to engage in conversation with one of the highest leaders in the Defense Department for the United States. So with that, it is my privilege to turn it over to Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Skelly.
Thank you, President Bodnar. I have to go through my round of thanks. I also have to thank Sky for getting us started tonight, as well as Dina Mansour, the Executive Director of the Center. I'd also like to thank your Chief of Staff, Kelly Webster. You mentioned Don the Ranger. They're the Defense Critical Language and Culture Program, and also a special thanks to the hospitality shown to my team and I during our all too brief visit to Montana in late November by the Adjutant General of the Montana National Guard, Major General Peter Roenick. We're so impressed and so grateful by what we were able to begin to learn about Montana and the example that the University of Montana and the Mansfield Center set for not just Montanans, but all Americans. So what I hope to do is my opening part of the dialogue, the conversation this evening, and with you, President Bodnar, and the folks participating tonight, is share a little bit about not only what we're doing in the Department of Defense as part of our mission on behalf of the American people, but provide some of that background context as to what it takes to do it, how we're organized to do it, from the perspective that my organization has, which is the responsibility for overseeing personnel and the readiness of the force on behalf of Secretary Austin. So what I'd like to do is I'll talk a little bit of the top line as to how we describe our mission, then what that's looking like around the world today. I'll do a little sort of geographic tour to horizon, going from east and keep on going around until we come back to home and talk about what the Department of Defense looks like underneath the surface in there. And then try and bring it home, talking about the most essential aspect of DoD, which are the American people that power it, if I could. So where do we get our mission? Where do we get our charge to do what the Department of Defense does for the American people? Well, traditionally, and it has been for several decades now, we write something called the National Defense Strategy. Usually it lasts for about 4 years. Generally, the kickoff to that process is when a new administration takes office or a new Secretary of Defense takes office, and we write a National Defense Strategy. The most recent one was written and signed in 2022. And with that, an unclassified summary of that is available out there on the web. If you search, you'll find it. It really has 4 main pillars and priorities that focus all the work that gets done. The first one is to defend the homeland. And we pace that defense by the really growing multi-domain, I'll talk about domains in just a little bit, the multi-domain threat that is posed by China. The second pillar is that we are charged to deter strategic attack against the United States, its allies and partners. And when we say strategic attack, we really mean nuclear attack or the really catastrophic, a large cyber attack or other weapons of mass destruction in that way. The third is to deter aggression in all its forms while being prepared to prevail in conflict if that is actually necessary. While doing so, that preparation needs to be prioritized against China with regard to the Indo-Pacific region, and then being prepared for Russia in the European theater. And finally, the fourth pillar is to build a resilient joint force and a defense ecosystem equally resilient. We have a lot of things that we have to do simultaneously in the Department of Defense, both at home and abroad. And what that really boils down to for us is we have to be ready to fight tonight. That's a mantra that many parts of our military live every day and prepare to be on notice for months at a time to be prepared to answer the call and fight tonight. So while we make our forces ready for that status, for that mission, simultaneously, we also have to be resetting the force that was just previously ready to fight tonight, get them rested, reset, educated, trained again, re-equipped. And then we're also simultaneously modernizing the force in a strategic sense, being ready to fight not just tonight, tomorrow, but years down the road in response to the myriad threats that change and develop across the world at that time. So it's obviously a 24/7, 365 global job that we have in the Department of Defense. So as we carry out those duties, Secretary Lloyd Austin has charged us with really 3 simple priorities as to whenever we look at the work that we have to do, which can often be very deep, very complex, and can cause us to put our head down sometimes, both literally and spiritually, in terms of when we're dealing with our challenges. Always be reminded that we're charged to defend the nation, charged to take care of our people, and we're charged also to ensure that we're succeeding through teamwork. Most people know and have had the experience that no really hard, no really long, no really complex task happens alone, either by an individual or just one small team or even one reasonably robust organization with a specific mission. There's always somebody you're going to need from your left and right, or somebody in front or behind who have other expertise, other talent, resources, permissions, authorities, and the like. We succeed together in any real and serious endeavor, and you always have to be open and mindful in building those relationships and making use of them. So we try and live those 3 priorities in the work that we do and circle back to them at every opportunity when we have the opportunity to look up and check how we're doing. So that's really the big picture of our mission and how we're charged to accomplish it. What I'd like to do is share a little bit about the challenges that we have out in the world today, many of which are kind of obvious and in the news feeds, and I'm sure that the folks who sign up to be a part of a Mansfield dialogue are pretty attuned to these, and I'll give you the perspective that we have here from the Department of Defense and from the vantage point of personnel and readiness within the Office of the Secretary. I'll start, as I mentioned, going eastward from here, which takes us across the Atlantic to Europe. 1 week from tonight will be February 22nd, which will mark 2 years since the full-scale illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's been a blink of an eye for us here. I can't imagine what it has been for Ukraine itself. But while a week from now will mark 2 weeks since the Russians crossed many more parts of the Ukrainian border than they did in 2014, that actual mission for us in the Department of Defense started months prior, when we began to accumulate the intelligence through our national intelligence community, the defense intelligence community, gaining the indications and warnings in the various ways that we can. But we saw that it was possible, that it was coming, and that the Russians were thinking about it. So we were already engaged in preparing our forces, beginning to consult with allies and partners discreetly, which the President, the White House, the Department of State did. We did it ourselves within the Department of Defense through our avenues. And meanwhile, we got our forces ready, and we began to put additional forces forward, as well as retain some of the forces that had been due to regularly rotate back out of Europe, in addition to the ones that are stationed there, in order to build deterrence, which is one of our pillars to deter aggression, and to bolster our NATO allies, and to reinforce the eastern flank of NATO, the Baltic states. Well, now it includes Finland, and soon, hopefully, Sweden will assess. But the Baltic states and Poland and Bulgaria and Romania, which all border either Russia or Belarus or Ukraine itself, and to ensure that there was no doubt that NATO would be ready for anything that the Russians may feel that they could do or want to do, either invading Ukraine or using it as some kind of feint, but to let Russia know that NATO was ready for come what may. So we've been in that place with regard to our own responsibilities to our NATO allies for over 2 years now. We've also been supporting Ukraine since the invasion, with an ever-increasing amount of support in many forms. We support them with intelligence. We support them with a vast array of training in different forms, alongside our NATO partners, as well as other international contributors to Ukraine's fight for freedom. But one of the things that we most closely are involved with in my organization is how we support Ukraine's armed forces directly with the provision of arms and munitions to literally fight the fight against the Russians for these past 2 years. That includes a great number of capabilities that we've taken right off of our own shelves, in some cases out of our force structure. We've provided the Ukrainians with artillery and over 2 million artillery shells. We've provided them with anti-tank missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, both the portable shoulder-launched variety, as well as anti-air missiles, aircraft launch missiles. We've included innumerable small arms ammunition, seemingly. We've also provided tanks, armored vehicles, and we've provided a lot of high-end combat training for already formed Ukrainian units, where some of our allies and partners are doing entry-level training for the Ukrainians and giving them more of the basics, and we're taking them some of our training facilities in Europe and running their units through exercises in that way. We have been stuck in on that and briefing Secretary Austin every few weeks regularly on all the work that we're doing, as he leads our effort and helps to lead a global effort in the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group, which just met this past week, where the world comes together to pitch in to help Ukraine. I'd be remiss not to mention that while our previously approved aid still flows to Ukraine as I speak, those are items that were approved late last year, because as it is right now, since the federal government is operating under a continuing resolution, we don't have a new fiscal year 2024 appropriation of funds. We have been unable to approve new aid and prepare it to move to the Ukrainians, which unfortunately open source news reports talk about how the Ukrainians are seeing some of their stocks run lower than we would like to see. But right now we don't have the authority to do more, and that requires a full fiscal year appropriation from Congress, and one that we certainly enthusiastically endorse, that the Senate bill or something like it finds its way to the House and can find its way to the president's desk to enable the president and the American people to continue to sustain our promise to Ukraine that we'll have their back for as long as it takes in their fight against Russia. Ukraine has succeeded in that fight to a degree that I think very few people, perhaps besides the Ukrainians themselves, thought was possible. They have set a new standard. They are rewriting what modern warfare looks like virtually every day. Russia has broken its ground forces in Ukraine and against the Ukrainian will and against the Ukrainian bravery shown every day in their fight against Russia, which was a vastly superior force in numbers and in by the book weapons capabilities. But as we know, it isn't just the dog, it's the size of the dog, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And Ukraine has proven that true, that it's about the human will and the human ingenuity and the sense of patriotism that you foster when you believe in a fight, what is possible. That doesn't mean that Russia has diminished completely as a threat to freedom and democracy, as it's proven itself to be by what it's done in Ukraine. The Russians have sustained their fight, pulling decades-old pieces of equipment out and putting into the fight. They've killed thousands of their young people in this attempt to snuff out Ukrainian democracy, but they continue to find more people to put in the fight. They continue to find more equipment to put into the fight to have destroyed by the Ukrainians. They've extended themselves and are now firing virtually every day Iranian and North Korean weapons at the Ukrainians while they try and rebuild their own defense industry that had atrophied over the years and was not prepared for what they had gotten themselves into. But in the meantime, they still have an air force, aside from the Black Sea Fleet that seems to get smaller every couple of weeks. They still have a navy outside of the Black Sea. They still have their strategic nuclear forces. They still have the ability to conduct espionage and sabotage across the world and do cyber crime and cyber attacks. They still pose a threat. And if allowed to persist, and I pray not prevail in Ukraine to some degree, they will be able to rearm and equip their ground forces at some time and be a continuing threat to our NATO allies that are in close proximity to Russia. They are a threat today, which is why Ukraine winning its fight and proving that aggression will not prevail is, as we believe, a world imperative in that way. And while simultaneously still stuck in Ukraine, Russia is still trying to extend itself globally. They continue through private military companies, agitate and try and seek influence in Africa, in unstable countries, which are challenged by terrorism and competition for resources, and some countries that have recently had coups. The Russians are there. They're not going away. And they're still trying to raise money by selling what arms they can produce and make available for sale across the world to those who are able to pay for them in that way. So Russia is a real and enduring threat, and our support to Ukraine is actually a fight for world stability and democracy. And we're a major part of that in our organization, and giving the Secretary of Defense an appreciation of how our effort informs our ability to perform our mission worldwide. And we're honored to have the ability to support his decision-making and his recommendations to the president in doing that. Moving on to the Middle East. Many people would have thought or presumed that with the large-scale defeat of ISIS, the withdrawal of our forces from Afghanistan, there'd be an expectation that we would be able to shift our attention, shift our focus, shift our effort fully or to some large degree to the Indo-Pacific theater, the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, the Western Pacific. That hasn't proven to be the case. Iran's extended and substantial support for multiple non-state actors across the broader Middle East and in part around the world, and as well as the persistence of the small remaining elements of ISIS and even Al-Qaeda, coupled with our continuing staunch commitment to Israel, our Gulf partners, and our need to contribute to the global economy and the stability of and the opportunity for free trade to flow from, into, through the greater Middle East, has required us to keep a presence in the Middle East that we might not have thought we'd need to have a substantial one, or one that would be in such a in such a sticky situation as we find it there today. Hamas's attack from Gaza upon Israel on October 7th of last year has heightened region-wide tensions to a degree that we probably have not seen since 1990, 1991, 92, when Iraq invaded Kuwait. There is a complex laydown of threat actors with capabilities and unpredictability that we just haven't really seen in a long time. It's a complex web. Israel is defending itself against the Hamas threat right now, while simultaneously over its northern border, Israel exchanges fire with Lebanese Hezbollah every day. Both Hamas and Hezbollah are supported by Iran. They have long-range rocket capabilities. Hamas has been severely diminished by Israel, but that work will continue. The president has been consulting with the Israeli government continuously about the conduct of that operation. Meanwhile, Lebanese Hezbollah is a large non-state actor, but it has a large infantry capability. It has armored vehicles and tanks. It has surface-to-air weapons. It has long-range rockets. It has anti-ship cruise missiles. It has one-way attack drones that many nations and actors are now employing around the world. And it is well supported by Iranian operatives. Likewise, there are militia groups in Syria and Iraq that are supported by Iran, and the Iranian Republican Guard and the Quds Force, their overseas operations arm. In there, those militia groups have been trying to attack Iran. Syria, the Syrian government is supported by Iran. while the Houthi rebels in western and northern Syria, Yemen, south of Saudi Arabia, are also supported by Iran, and they have an accumulation of capabilities that probably equal Lebanese Hezbollah and exceed it in some ways. The Houthis have unmanned aerial vehicles, attack drones. They have anti-ship cruise missiles, land attack cruise missiles. They have conventional ballistic missiles. They have anti-ship ballistic missiles. They have a handful of barely operable but still threatening tactical fighter aircraft that are left over from decades ago. They have drones. They have unmanned surface vehicles, broadly similar to the kind that Ukraine has been using to effect against the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. And they, all of these groups, all of these actors have been attacking Western interests in the Southern Red Sea and one of the most important straits for global commerce, the Bab el-Mandeb, the gap between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, where about 13% of world commerce passes through that way, and they're affecting shipping rates, insurance rates, and the like, and have the ability to constrain trade as they shoot anything that they think may have some connection to Israel, the United States, United Kingdom, or any Western country that's trying to stabilize that area and make it possible for commerce to flow. And as most people on this conversation have probably been aware, in order to respond to those attacks against civilian vessels, as well as attempted attacks upon coalition naval vessels in there, U.S. and UK forces have conducted multiple strikes against Houthi weapons capabilities in Yemen for several weeks now in that way. Meanwhile, those Iranian-aligned militia groups in Iraq and Syria that I mentioned, which you've seen, have been trying to attacking our forces that are in both Iraq and Syria. And unfortunately, just about 2.5 weeks ago, they attacked an outpost on the Jordanian border with the intersection of Iraq and Syria. And we lost 3 of our soldiers, Georgia Army reservists, to an Iranian-aligned militia group attack with a drone. And several days later, we took out the leader of that militia group in Baghdad. But all those groups are supplied by Iran, to some degree directed, influenced, inspired by Iran. And they can all shoot hundreds and hundreds of miles away with varying degrees of accuracy and impact. It's a type of instability and threat environment with multiple threat actors that that are aggrieved with lots of different states and causes, and they have the ability to do real damage. And that while the energy resources of the Gulf are still important globally, and to keep the world economy going and stable, we have to be able to ensure that those resources can move where they're needed. And we have commitments to make sure that happens. So we keep forces in the Middle East to be able to contribute to the defense of those countries that have those resources. Meanwhile, one of the global actors that I'll talk about next, China, also has an interest in the free flow of trade and energy from the Middle East, and they have a small presence in the region, but they've decided to stay apart from the combined effort to keep that flow going, and they're just looking out presently for their own vessels at this time, which is interesting with regard to their contribution to the global commons in that way. So if I could, I'll turn to the Indo-Pacific. China has been on the rise for a very long time as an economic power, and is now using its economic power to develop a military capability that is challenging for the free world if it chooses to use it for anything other than benign purposes. China is expanding its influence in the world at a real speed, and the People's Liberation Army is growing its capabilities at a truly breakneck pace. China is using that growing power to try and make real its territorial claims for essentially the entirety of the South China Sea, as well as elsewhere in its immediate proximity, which is bringing it into confrontation with many of its neighbors, from Korea to Japan to the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, even Indonesia at times. All are being challenged by China for what have been historically their own economic zones and sovereign pieces in the South China Sea. Meanwhile, China more globally is looking to extend itself through what used to be called the Belt and Road Initiative, an investment scheme of developing economic infrastructure, ports and roads and the like, as well as making donations to countries across Southeast Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, Africa, South America, the South Pacific, and even parts of Southern and Eastern Europe, where they're looking to use development to wedge in and gain influence with various governments, in some cases to try and open the door for military access for a global presence that they seek to establish one day. The Biden-Harris administration, in response in the last 2+ years, has exerted our own influence with regard to an Indo-Pacific strategy that advances a shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, where allies and partners come together with shared stakes, looking to achieve shared outcomes. We've taken already existing relationships, many of which are alliances. There isn't one grand alliance in the Pacific like NATO, but we have a lot of bilateral alliances and relationships in the Indo-PACOM that we continue to strengthen, heighten, and also begin to make different types of connections between our already existing bilateral allies. Well, not in a true multilateral sense, it's moving towards a multilateral effect. We've done a lot with Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Australia. We've offered our support to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. We've created the Australia-UK-US AUKUS relationship that's specifically focused on providing nuclear submarine technology to Australia. That's now expanded to other high-tech defense applications, in which other nations are now looking to join that partnership to grow together and increasing our defense capabilities to the highest end, bringing the best that we all have to bring to the table. And underpinning all of that activity has been an increased focus on exercises and training with all these partners, so that we have a shared familiarity with our capabilities and drive towards ever greater interoperability to deal with whatever challenges may present us in the Indo-Pacific in the years to come. What can never go unsaid about the Indo-Pacific is Taiwan. The U.S. has a staunch policy that we will not support, and we don't accept that there can be a unilateral change in the status of Taiwan. Any potential relationship, let alone reunification between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China, has to be with the democratic acceptance and choice of the Taiwanese people. With that, People's Republic of China has embarked for quite some time on a pressure campaign with regard to Taiwan and the Taiwanese people, through influence operations, political and diplomatic interactions, trying to isolate and pressure Taiwan, keep them apart from the world economy, world organizations, break diplomatic ties wherever possible, while simultaneously using their ever-building military power to display what the PRC believes it will be capable of doing one day, which is to make it a fait accompli that they can take Taiwan by force against its will, insubordinate to the People's Republic. And that pressure campaign can take the form of repeated flights of aircraft testing Taiwan's air defenses. It can be the firing of artillery near Taiwanese islands. It can be the firing of long-range rockets in general proximity to Taiwanese airspace. And it can also include PLA Navy ships essentially ringing Taiwan with a number of surface combatants outside their territorial waters from time to time. and letting them know that their capabilities and their prowess continue to grow. So China is a strategic competitor globally, economically, and diplomatically for us, but it's also what we refer to quite a bit in the Department of Defense as our pacing challenge. While the United States and our allies, many of our allies and partners spent the better part of 2 decades engaged in a war on terrorism, largely in the Middle East and Northeast and Northern Africa, China was embarking upon an all-encompassing modernization program for its armed forces, in which they have left no stone unturned. They've left no option unexplored. They have tried, are trying everything, and they're doing it at speed and at scale. They're now producing, deploying, and delivering truly modern, advanced, and sometimes really paradigm-challenging, paradigm-shattering military capabilities, platforms in every domain. And when we talk about domain, we mean on the ground, in the air, on the sea, under the sea, in space, in cyber, and as well as in the information space, and challenging people's perceptions of what's true and what's real. It's begun to be called cognitive warfare. They're moving in all of those places all the time. Meanwhile, they've built an amphibious capability akin to our Marine Corps, not exactly like, but they have the ability to move people from the sea to the shore. They have expeditionary capabilities that they continue to build and develop. They've begun to field, they have been fielding long-range weapons of every type, and actually inventing new types. They have surface-to-surface missiles, incredibly long-range surface-to-air missiles. They're ballistic, they're hypersonic, which means faster than Mach 5. They also have cruise missiles. They have missiles that you don't know what it's going to do until it actually does it to you, because the same thing could either be an anti-air missile, it could be an anti-ship missile, or it could be a land attack cruise missile, and you don't know until it's very late. They are putting so many things into space, it's truly remarkable. Satellites and sensors of all kinds at all orbits and orbital altitudes, as well as proliferating the ground systems, and as well as creating capabilities to attack other nations' capabilities in space. They're fielding ships of all classes, trying to build aircraft carriers and learn how to make them work. They're fielding what we call 5th-generation fighters, akin to our stealth fighters, the F-35 and the F-22. And they're also building probably the most dominant weapon system that we have that they're trying to compete with, nuclear attack submarines. Meanwhile, they continue to proliferate a nuclear force, all its kind of mobile road missiles, as well as siloed missiles, and proliferating them at a real speed. And it's of a different kind than the Cold War relationship that we had with the Soviet Union, where we were 2 parties facing off against each other, being informed by each other strategically. China said, we don't care about your paradigm. We're doing it this way, and we don't understand the rules that the U.S. and then Soviet Union and now Russia had developed for that strategic competition of large nuclear weapons. China is not 10 feet tall, nor are they the 500-pound gorilla in the room. But everything that they've done over the past 20 plus years has been with the specific intention of keeping the United States out of the Western Pacific, so that we could not support our allies when they needed us, when they wanted us there. And anyone that we do have in that area that they refer to as the second island chain, which is from Guam westward to the Chinese mainland, would be held under risk and under threat immediately, almost all the time. And they're close to getting there. Everything they do is specifically to keep us out and defeat how we fight and what we have to fight continuously. But we have advantages. China knows those. China respects them, but they are not afraid of them, and they don't accept our advantage in perpetuity, which is why we have to continue to develop our forces, our capability, our tactics and procedures and the like, to ensure that China does not get to a place where it feels like it can do what it wants when it wants to, because it has shown it will do whatever it can when it wants to do so, while we're simultaneously faced with a Russia that has already decided it's just fine with incurring the kinds of losses and committing the types of acts that it has in Ukraine, and probably will not be deterred unless it loses in Ukraine. While Iran proliferates weapons across all kinds of radical actors, seemingly with little constraint, and holding them to little account while it does so. Those are our three big theaters that have our attention in the Department of Defense, while simultaneously there's growing instability in Africa, where China, Russia, and Iran are all beginning to compete for influence and access to all kinds of precious minerals and resources for both just plain old wealth as well as industrial competition. In that way, there are still terror groups. Terror groups are proliferating in Africa slowly but surely. There are remnants in the Middle East. Al-Shabaab is also supported by Iran in Somalia, and is so close to Yemen that they're all part of one same terror smuggling network that we try to interdict wherever we can. Meanwhile, larger things, world trends continue with the proliferation and advancement of artificial intelligence, and what that means for our day-to-day life, with misinformation and disinformation, and the economic advantage, and how that may be applied to warfighting, or just power dynamics. Meanwhile, there is plain old cyber, cracking open, stealing secrets, dropping infrastructure, trying to turn off your power, trying to turn off your water supplies, maybe mess with your nuclear reactor, and the like, as well as just clean out the various bank accounts. Climate change is an influence upon many areas of instability in the world, making it fewer places that are hospitable, water harder to find, and challenge us for power and energy and the like to be able to deal with all those things, and making people move and compete. And with the change in climate means that the Arctic region of the world is more accessible than it's ever been. It is still really cold up there, and colder than we are normally accustomed to doing things in, but it's more accessible, which means there is a slowly, gradually increasing competition for access in the Arctic, which can become economic, as the ability to harvest resources and bring them into our economies is sought by China, Russia, and any of those who might be able to get up there and survive and operate in that way. And I personally thought that the Arctic region would be a place that some of my work might be concentrated in this tenure, but between Russia and Iran in the last 2.5 years, that has not come to pass. Having shared a little bit about what is in the broad windscreen of our day-to-day here in the Department of Defense in terms of what's happening in the world, most of our work is often in how do we keep the enterprise healthy and moving and able to support what we need to do out in the world. It's really easy to talk about how many planes and tanks we have in our formations, and all the weapon systems that are being developed, and the capabilities that are going to be developed. But President Bodnar was very kind to point out my Navy background, proud member of Naval Aviation. So I'm going to throw another wrench in the works and quote a Marine General. Marine General Robert Barrow has a quote that lives with me all the time in the conduct of my business for about the past 20 years, when I really became aware of it and had the professional maturity to really appreciate it. The general said, and I quote, "Amateurs talk strategy and tactics, while professionals study logistics and sustainment in time of war." And being just young enough to be a movie pop culture person, that also makes me click in my head from the movie The Right Stuff, in the book The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, where early in the space program, the astronauts all got together to fight for the funding for their program to ensure success. And the phrase was then, "No bucks, no Buck Rogers." It really is about what happens logistically, training, educating your force, making sure that it's robust and prepared to go. And then all those things, flying, fighting, driving, sailing, deploying, are possible. You have to think about the basics and the blocking and tackling and make those happen to be able to do the high-end things that are, as we often say, the pointy end of the mission end of the Department of Defense. And how any of that happens, it really begins and ends with people. My original job that I was confirmed for is Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness, and my one-sentence job description was and still is Principal Advisor to the Secretary of Defense for all matters related to the readiness of the total force. The total force is the 3.4 million people in the Department of Defense. That is our active military forces, our reserve, our National Guard, as well as our career government civilians. We have almost half of all federal government civilians work for the Department of Defense, and then about 400,000 or so contract employees that are inside our installations, inside our offices, and the like there, which is separate from those who are building and creating things for us in the defense industrial base. So 3.4 million people, that's sort of our day-to-day force in one way or another. Our budget for the last couple of years, and based on the Inflation Reduction Act that we have and the Fiscal Responsibility Act, our budget is expected to be relatively flatline. When we get one, we need a budget. As I mentioned before, with the defense supplemental, we also need a budget appropriation. Continuing resolutions are very bad for our business. Yes, we have the money to operate, but a lot of authorities and special funds that are unique for new acquisitions and new programs are not available to us when we operate under a continuing resolution like we have been since October 1st, which means we are on the cusp of losing 6 months of this year to our competitors out in the world. Russia doesn't have, it's a byproduct of our democracy, so that's something we're actually defending, but our democracy sometimes can get a little messy and a little bumpy, and a continuing resolution doesn't unlock all the authorities that we have to do the hard things and do them fast. And so we'd really appreciate getting one of those for anybody who cares to make that call to their congressman or whoever, but it's tough to do. But our budget's $840 billion a year right now, depending upon if you add the nuclear weapons in, it changes, but roughly we call it about $840 billion. With that $840 billion a year, we have 4,700 sites or locations. Some of them are big bases, some of them are little radio relay stations out in the desert where we put a navigational aid or some sort of sensor out there. We have 4,700 sites. We have 560,000 buildings, facilities, radio towers, all those kind of things. The property that we're responsible for, either we own, lease, rent, what have you, is 42,000 square miles, the size of Virginia. DOD is, you could effectively say, the size of Virginia and 3.4 million people. And those are the ones that just work for us. Meanwhile, we have a health system that's responsible for around 9.5 million people, which includes our active guard and reserve force. It also includes their family members and dependents. Then it includes retired people like me, veterans who don't get retired benefits, but get other benefits are taken care of by our great partners at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where we have retired people and their family members. That's 9.5 million people we have healthcare responsibilities for, while doing the business of trying to create a medically ready force, service members who are ready to report for duty and perform mission every day, as well as creating, at the same time, a ready medical force to do all the things if we ever have to fight a major conflict, which we have to be prepared to do. That's about 130,000 people in our healthcare force of that 3.4 million people, civilian and military. We have 706 treatment facilities, from full-blown hospitals to small clinics to fairly robust clinics that are just below hospital size. That has an operating budget of about $17 billion a year. We spend about $40 billion all told on our insurance programs as well as our care. We have our own medical school in the Department of Defense, and it's one of the highest rated ones in the nation when you look at it through the lens of student satisfaction, student rankings in that place. We have a lot of things. Not only do we have a medical system and our own medical school, we have a K through 12 school system, most folks are probably aware, the Department of Defense education activity. How do we take care of our service members and their dependents when they were in locations where we need to have assured schooling for our folks across the country as well as overseas? With a $3 billion a year budget, we take care of 71,000 students with about 15,000 employees. 163 schools, 7 states, 2 territories, and 11 countries. And much like our medical school, the Department of Defense education activity schools are some of the highest ranked in the nation by the terms of educational achievement and scholarships and grants that are awarded to those students. They're really high performing and highly well reviewed. We operate a grocery chain. Our commissaries, we have 240 full-blown grocery stores across the world. We have a couple of subordinate retail store chains. The Army and the Air Force have 4,000 different stores, from the commissary that's probably the size of a small Target to the convenience stores all over the place. Likewise, the Navy has 300 stores and 14,000 employees doing retail stuff for our forces. And I couldn't find the numbers for the Marine Corps exchange system, which kind of makes sense, but they have their own too at their own scale. We have degree conferring universities in our war colleges and our universities. We have the Military Academy at West Point. We have the Naval Academy in Annapolis. We have the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. We also have research universities in the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, as well as the Air Force Institute of Technology that are also highly rated. All of that is some of the foundational work and care that goes into creating and sustaining and taking care of our people and their families. A saying that's endured for generations in the Department of Defense, and another one of those things that we have to be mindful of all the time, and repeat it as required. We recruit an individual service member, we retain them as a family as people mature. Some folks bring family with them into the force. Most people find a husband and wife, partner, have children while they're with us. And our ability to treat them as professionals, but also care for them and set them up for success as a family is pretty determinant on how long they will stay with us. And how long they stay with us is pretty important, because as our force and its tasks become ever more complex, the ability to hold on for people and have them develop as professionals and become leaders and also pay it back and grow the next generation is becoming ever more important to our ability to succeed. From my vantage point in the 2 jobs that I've had in my 2.5 years serving in the department in this tour, I mentioned one of Secretary Austin's charges to us is to succeed through teamwork. We do that inside the Department of Defense all the time, working with the Department of the Navy, or working with Special Operations Command, or working with the Defense Logistics Agency on a problem. All the parts of the department can come into play at any one time. But I've personally dealt with and deal with on a reasonably regular basis. Just in the White House, I interact with the National Security Council, the Domestic Policy Council. Again, we have 3.4 million people. I deal with the National Economic Council from time to time because of the financial wherewithal and the place of our folks. I deal with the Council on Economic Quality, the Council on Environmental Quality, the CEQ, because we have so many industrial facilities and that have a legacy of their own, and also the responsibility we have to how we conduct ourselves as a major player in the American domestic space. I also we have a great relationship with an element of the White House that some folks might not be familiar with, called Joining Forces, which is sponsored by the Office of the First Lady, which is focused on the attention to and care of military and veterans' families, their caregivers, as well as their survivors in that place, to ensure that any domestic or military policies, any of those economic policies, account for the unique situations of our military and veterans' families and those who support them, and those who may be survivors for those who might have lost their lives in service or subsequently lost their life while as a veteran, which can make their circumstances a little bit more complicated. And we deal with them. Just last week, for example, I sat and represented the Department of Defense on the Interagency Council on Homelessness, where there were 4 full cabinet members three cabinet secretaries and the director of the Domestic Policy Council, and I was there for Department of Defense because we know that at times we have veterans experience undue rates of homelessness, and as the Department of Defense, we make veterans as an output of our mission. We make 200,000 veterans a year, and we have an incredibly close active partnership with the VA as to how we affect the movement of our people to become their people as veterans that they then have a responsibility to support. The other agencies that I interact with regularly, we deal with Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Immigration, because people become American citizens in part by signing up to serve our country in uniform, and they get accelerated processing for citizenship. I deal with the Department of Labor and their veterans employment programs. I also deal with their Office of Occupational Safety and Health. I deal with the Department of Commerce, Department of Education for the validation certification of some of our education programs, and as well as how we fund some of our folks to get degrees out in the civilian education system. I deal with Health and Human Services from time to time about some of their pieces parts. I've dealt with the Environmental Protection Agency, again, about how we take care of our installations. I've dealt with the Department of Transportation, to include the Federal Aviation Administration. I deal with the Department of State for how we get things approved for how our people conduct themselves when they're stationed overseas. I mentioned VA. We deal with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, how they focus, I think, in such a commendable fashion for the economic protection of our service members and veterans, because some folks understand that our service members have an assured source of income while they serve with us, and that they feel like with that they can put them in a bind and exploit them economically. The same for veterans. They can entice them looking for deals, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau works closely with us as to where they need to focus their attentions to economically protect our service members, their families, as well as our veterans. And we even deal with the Department of Agriculture, because we have responsibility to ensure food security for all our people in uniform and their families. And the Department of Agriculture has the federal government lead for food security understanding and support. It's complex. It's amazing. I don't think I really expected it would be that broad a scope and scale, but as I do the business every day here, it makes more sense every day. And I'm so grateful to be a partner and have the partnership of the incredible professional civilian professionals, quite a few veterans in a lot of those places that serve us as Americans, all Americans in those different agencies, and the passion that they bring, which is no different than the passion and the patriotism that's brought to bear inside the Department of Defense by all of our folks. I've had to talk at some of the highest levels of the federal government about as a variety of left and right limit of what sometimes I'm asked to do and lift up the work of our professionals who do it every day. I've had to talk about how we reimburse our service members when they deploy, move their family overseas, and how they bring their pets with them. Because you have to fill out a travel claim for, these were our hotel expenses, this was our airline ticket, this is how much we spent on food and the like while we were in a hotel waiting to get to our final living location. And we had to bring Fluffy with us. And we had to pay for Fluffy to go on the airline and to go into a kennel and all those things. And how do we approve those expenses? How much of it do we cover? That's a big deal on a real family of life quality type of thing, which is one of the things that contributes to retaining them as a family. We have that in my personal and Readiness organization with lots of great professionals. And meanwhile, sometimes literally the next day, I could be in a conversation with Secretary Austin and General Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where our other experts on our team have talked about how we think about how much of a particular weapon system that we have that is in our own plans and that we may want to consider providing to Ukraine for their fight against Russia. And what is our understanding if we gave this type of capability, and how much of it and how much planning we'd have to do to account for giving that much to the Ukrainians, and how that contributes to our security as much as it might contribute to our security were it to be sitting in a magazine somewhere in the world or somewhere in the United States, and understanding that trade-off, that when we do it and supporting the secretary's decision and recommendation to the president on those things, are my left and right limit are those two worlds of pets. And accounting for the strategic impact of our weapons. It's an incredible experience. Everything we do here in DoD is powered by American people on behalf of the American people. Those who step forward embrace the opportunity that this life in uniform presents, who seek the challenge to grow, better themselves, provide for their family, build a future while serving and learning about mission accomplishment and a cause greater than themselves. They're all to be commended, because it's not the stealth fighters or the drones or the nuclear weapons or the cyber capabilities alone. Those don't really defend us. It's the people that devise those things, operate those things, fix those things, make them real, and are able to employ them when they're required, when directed by the president. It's those people in all those roles and ways that actually keep us prosperous and free. And it's up to us in the Department of Defense to properly support them, to ensure that that happens, not just that they're able to perform the mission at the time, but the issue of our time is whether or not we can continue to attract enough young Americans into our joint force, the uniformed forces, with the talent they can bring, which is the talent we need to actually fill the ranks, the myriad specialties that we have. We have everything from musicians to orbital mechanic scientists in uniform. We have doctors, we have undersea welders. Our people become astronauts. Our people are veterinarians, taking care of our working dogs and also, ensuring our food safety and security. We have people who literally kick doors when mission calls for it. And we have people who care for all kinds of ailments and high-end surgery. That's all talent that resides in the American people, as well as people capable of learning those skills and becoming expert at them, reside in the American people. And we need them all to be able to achieve a ready and sustainable force. Unfortunately, though, American youth are really less propensed and interested in service than they've ever been. So over the history of the all-volunteer force, we're behind. People are not just disconnected from us, they're disinterested. It's a multifaceted challenge. And I steadfastly believe that the most important thing we can do is take care of our people in a way such that our reputation grows, that we can close the gap and people see successful Americans become successful veterans all the time. So I really want to thank President Bodnar and everyone at the Mansfield Center for having me here today and enabling me to go way over time.
Well, thank you, Secretary Skelly. That was an insightful tour around the globe of threats that we face and the incredible complexity that you and so many others face in defending this country, defending this democracy that we hold so dear. I am so deeply grateful for your willingness to share your time with us. We are at our ending time, and I hate that because I wanted to get into some dialogue, but I had written down about 3 questions, all of which you answered and you covered. So I do, though, just want to ask one question. We had lots of questions come in asking about Russia, asking about the Ukraine, questions about the recruiting challenges, some of the things you're doing. So a lot of those were covered. One of the questions that I have, and I just would like to end on, the University of Montana, as you and I spoke about, Madam Secretary, when you were here, was recognized 2 years in a row by Washington Monthly as the #1 university in the country for community and national service. We are so proud of the way that our students, our alumni, our faculty and staff are committed to serving the greater good. You have served on the National Commission for Military, National, and Public Service. And I would love to just close by asking you to share your thoughts on what we as a community, what we as educators can do to inspire service in young people, to have people that follow in your example.
What I learned during that the experience you just described, in the appreciation that is I took away and that continues to deepen for me, is boils down to service is service. To understand that helping your neighbor, serving in your community, in whatever form it takes, is serving your country. And that as people begin to understand what that giving of themselves just a little bit, how much that returns back to them as individuals, the scientific study, which is still relatively nascent, is proving out that people who serve feel and do better as a result of it while doing good. It's really remarkable. Especially it was really stark in seniors who help fellow seniors. They became healthier and happier. And that actually does accrue to younger people. I think it's the exposure as early as reasonably possible and be able to connect it to a greater good, to realize that anything you do that contributes to the greater good is time well spent, and that folks tend to seek more of it. It becomes habitual.
Thank you. I think well said. One of the things I try to share with my own kids is that the happiest days of our lives are when we're serving others. And Madam Secretary, you have done our university and our community a tremendous service this evening. I know we are past 10 p.m. Eastern, and I know that mornings in the Pentagon don't start at 10 a.m. So we are going to let you retire for the evening. I bet you'll have a few hours of sleep and then back at work defending us and this democracy. So thank you again, Secretary Skelly. Thank you to the Mansfield Center. Thank you to all of you who joined us this evening. What a great conversation, and we just couldn't be more thrilled and honored to have had you with us. So thank you, Madam Secretary, and we look forward to having you back out here in Montana soon.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good night, everyone.